I'm Jenna Whitaker, 31, and by the time the front door swung open on Thanksgiving afternoon, I already knew I was stepping into a performance where I wasn't in the cast. The house smelled like butter and sage, the kind of scent that should make you feel welcome, but it only reminded me how easily warmth can be staged. I shifted the pumpkin tart in my hands and waited for a hello that didn't come. Laughter rose from the living room, my brother's voice right in the middle of it, like a spotlight that never burned out. In the dining room, 11 chairs glowed under crystal and china. 10 place cards waited like invitations with my name missing. A metal folding chair leaned against the wall, practical and quiet, as if someone had already decided where I belonged. I took a breath that didn't quite reach my lungs and stepped inside. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments and tap that like and subscribe if you've ever walked into a room that told you without a word exactly how little space you were supposed to take. I grew up 10 miles from that front door on a street where porch lights doubled as neighbors' handshakes, and everybody knew the names of your dogs. My parents raised us on simple rules: keep your word, show up on time, and never make kindness something you do for applause. Dad taught shop class and fixed everything from squeaky hinges to an old snowblower that had no business surviving one more winter. Mom ran the house like a small company calendars, on the fridge coupons in a neat stack, a list for everything. We weren't poor, but there was an extra. My first laptop was a hand-me-down with a stuck space bar that I learned to coax along with a pencil tip and patience, and even then I felt lucky. Feeling lucky became a habit. Lucky to get an after-school job at the library. Lucky to find a mentor who told me I could be good at code. Lucky to land scholarships that closed the gap when savings ran thin. When I left for college 3 states away, I carried those rules with me like a toolkit. Do the work. Keep your head down. Let the results speak. The first internship I landed was in a world where conference rooms had glass walls, espresso machines hissed like trains, and people tossed around numbers that could swallow a year's salary whole. It wasn't glitz that drew me. It was the systems, how ideas became product roadmaps, how deadlines held, how teams learned to row in the same direction. I found my lane in project leadership, the quiet translator between engineers and executives, the person who kept moving pieces from grinding against each other. It paid better than any job I'd imagined at 16, but the money was never the point. What mattered was making something that worked and knowing I'd held my corner without cutting corners. Home, though, never kept pace with that new rhythm. In our house, achievement lived in a different light, warmer and louder, and often pointed at Tyler. Mom liked a story she could tell at the grocery store, a promotion described in bright strokes, a certificate in a frame, a win she could set on the mantle. Mine were harder to narrate, bugs squashed before they made headlines, launches that went so smoothly they looked boring from the outside, late-night calls with teams in other time zones that ended in quiet success. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that being steady meant not needing the kind of attention that fizzled anyway. Most days I believed it. Still, when Dad's back surgery kept him home for weeks and the bills stacked up like a second mailbox, I did what I knew how to do. I built a spreadsheet called the utility company, handled the paperwork, and sent groceries on Thursdays so Mom wouldn't have to count cans. I don't think anyone noticed the rhythm I kept, and I didn't make a point of announcing it. Kindness, my parents used to say, isn't kindness if you demand people clap. So I kept quiet even when the quiet tugged at me in small, sore places I didn't name. When the letter about the lien arrived the following spring, heavy with official ink, I took another breath, moved some savings I'd planned for a down payment, and made sure Dad's house stayed his house. The receipt lived in a folder on my laptop. No one else ever opened. It felt like the right thing, and I slept better knowing it was done. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around, the house looked like a magazine. Aunt MJ had arranged the centerpiece of late-season roses. The good silver caught the afternoon light, and the table runner matched the cloth napkins in a way that told you Mom had checked twice. Tyler stood by the fireplace with his arm around Brooke, telling a story that had everyone leaning in. When I set the tart on the counter, Mom nodded without turning from the oven, the kind of nod you give a neighbor returning your Tupperware. I pressed a smile into place and carried my coat to the spare room. Maybe I'd imagined the missing place card. Maybe one would appear when it was time to sit. Maybe wasn't a plan, but sometimes it's the only thing between you and a feeling you don't want to have in front of other people. When we were called to dinner, the chairs gleamed like a promise. Names faced each plate in Mom's tidy script: Aunt MJ, Uncle Frank, Paige Nolan, Dad, Mom, Tyler Brooke, and so on down the table. I found the folding chair again and pulled it close to the end, careful not to scrape the floor. Someone had already set an extra plate plain white without the gold rim. It was nothing, and it was everything. The room hummed with an energy I recognized the sound of a family celebrating itself. I kept my shoulders squared and my voice even, answered questions about work with details small enough to fit in passing, and listened to Tyler describe a recent project like it was a rescue mission. I nodded for him because that's what you do when you want the night to remain intact. I wish I could say I didn't notice Mom watching the table like a conductor. She sees everything, whose glass is low, whose smile is slipping when the rolls need another 2 minutes. It's a gift, and sometimes it's a lever. Plates cleared the room, tightened around the pause that comes before dessert, that little hush where a speech fits. Mom lifted her glass, and the reflection from the chandelier caught the rim just so. She looked down the length of the table, her face open and proud, and drew a breath that gathered the room toward her. I felt my hands fold in my lap, steady and still, and in that beat before she spoke, I knew exactly where the story was about to turn. When Mom raised her glass that evening, the sound of crystal tapping caught every voice mid-sentence. Her smile looked warm from a distance, but up close it had edges. The chandelier's light spilled over the table like a spotlight searching for its cue. I knew what was coming before she opened her mouth. It wasn't intuition, it was history. "I just want to take a moment," she began, voice lifting in that practiced way she used when she wanted to be heard above a crowd. "This year has shown us who truly stepped up, who made us proud." Fork stilled. Eyes turned toward her like actors waiting for the next line. Then she said it. "So let's raise a glass to the only child who truly made this family proud." Applause broke out around me. Chairs scraped lightly. Laughter rose again, and all eyes found Tyler. He smiled, flushed, with that polite kind of embarrassment people wear when they know they're being adored. I sat frozen, my fingers tight around the napkin in my lap. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The message was carved clean into the air. I wasn't meant to belong at that table, at least not tonight. Dad reached for his drink eyes down the way he always did when the room tilted out of balance. I stood slowly, trying to keep my breathing even. My chair made the smallest sound on the hardwood, but it felt deafening. "Thanks," I said, hearing my voice as if it belonged to someone else for finally saying it out loud. I turned toward the doorway. That was all I had planned. No speech, no scene, just an exit before the heat behind my eyes turned into tears. I was almost to the hallway when Dad's voice stopped me. "Wait," he said, not loud but firm enough that the room stilled again. For a man who spent a lifetime keeping peace through silence, that one word carried weight. He set his glass down carefully. "Tell them what you did." The words didn't make sense at first. Every face turned toward me, Mom's polite expression flickering, Tyler's smile shrinking. I looked at Dad, trying to understand how much he knew. His eyes met mine, steady, not accusing, not pleading, just waiting. It wasn't an order, it was permission. I turned back to the table, the same table where I'd set silverware since I was tall enough to reach it. "You all want to toast Tyler," I began quietly. "Maybe start with me because I'm the reason he got that job." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then a few nervous chuckles rolled through the room, uncertain and brittle. Tyler blinked like he hadn't heard right. What he said, forcing a small laugh. "That's not true." I met his eyes. "When Crestfall PR froze their hiring last year, you weren't even supposed to get an interview. I sent your resume to someone I mentored, someone who owed me a favor. I rewrote your cover letter, cleaned up the whole thing." Mom's shoulders tightened. "That's ridiculous," she said, voice sharp around the edges. "Your brother was qualified. They saw potential." "Mom," I replied softly, "he didn't even know what PR stood for when he sent me his first draft." A few heads turned toward Tyler. His fiancée, Brooke, stared at her plate. "That's not true," Tyler muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. I kept going, calm, not angry. He majored in film studies, listed great people skills as his top qualification. I fixed it because I wanted him to succeed. I didn't want the credit. But tonight, when you all toasted him, it hit me. I don't need applause, but I'm tired of being erased." The silence that followed didn't feel awkward. It felt exact, like the truth had landed exactly where it needed to. Mom crossed her arms. "You make everything about you, Jenna. Can't you let your brother have one night?" The words hit a nerve I'd buried years ago, like when I graduated early with honors and you said, "Are you sure the ceremony's worth going to?" Or when I won the state tech scholarship and you called it a cute computer hobby. I paused, my voice steady. "Tyler finishes a 6-week online branding course and you frame the certificate." A flush crept up Mom's neck. "That's not the same." "No," I said. "It never is." Tyler finally looked at me. No smirk this time, just uncertainty. "I didn't know you went through all that," he said quietly. "You didn't need to," I told him. It was easier not to know. Dad leaned back in his chair, his hand covering his mouth, eyes shining with something between regret and pride. The rest of the family stayed still like the air had thickened. I could feel every heartbeat in my throat. Mom broke the silence first. "What do you want Jenna credit a medal?" "No," I said. "Truth, acknowledgement. To not be invisible in a room I helped keep standing." She exhaled sharply and turned away. The gesture was small, but it said everything. Deflection was her favorite kind of surrender. Dad's voice came low and calm. "I didn't know you helped him," he said to me, then to Tyler. "Did you?" Tyler didn't answer. He stared at his plate, the gravy cooling beside untouched turkey. I turned to Mom again. "When you toasted him, I didn't want to ruin dinner. I wanted to sit quietly and let it pass. But I couldn't." Why, she asked. "Because I spent my savings last year paying off the IRS lien on this house so Dad wouldn't lose it, and you still called me selfish." Her face went pale, then pink, then still. "If you had that kind of money," she said tightly, "why didn't you help when Tyler's car broke down?" The question landed so absurdly that the cousins exchanged small, nervous glances. "That's it, Mom," I said, my voice trembling only once before finding its place. "You measure worth by what Tyler needs next, not by what anyone else gives. You don't want to understand. You just want to keep the story where you're right." Dad's hand came up again, not loud, but final. "Enough," he said. The word carried the weight of years he hadn't spoken up. "You paid the lien?" I nodded. "Every cent. From my savings." He looked down, then back up. "You shouldn't have had to." "I know," I said softly. Mom stood abruptly, her chair bumping the table. "I need air," she said, and left the room without looking at anyone. Tyler followed a moment later, his steps slow, his face drawn. The room stayed frozen in that strange quiet where no one knows which way the floor tilts next. Aunt MJ shifted in her seat. "Jenna," she began carefully, "you don't have to." "I already did," I said, gathering my plate, my voice calm again. The rest of the table seemed smaller now, people avoiding eye contact with their reflections in the glassware. For once, I didn't feel the urge to fill the silence. I let it sit thick and honest until I felt the cold air drift in from the hallway. I walked toward the door. Behind me, chairs creaked and whispers started, but none of it mattered. Outside, the night was crisp enough to sting my lungs. I stood on the porch and watched the breath leave my body like smoke disappearing into the dark. When I heard the door open again, I didn't turn right away. Tyler's voice came from behind me, softer than I'd ever heard it. "Jenna, wait!" I turned then, the porch light cutting the shadows between us. His face looked different. No charm, no defense, just the quiet weight of someone trying to find words he hadn't used before. "I need to admit something," he said. I crossed my arms, the November chill settling into my sleeves. "Then say it." He hesitated, gripping the doorframe like he might lose balance. I knew he said finally, "About the job. HR mentioned your name after I got the offer." My stomach sank. "And you said nothing." "I wanted to believe I earned it," he said, his voice cracking. I told myself it didn't matter, that I still had to show up. "You didn't just stay silent," I said quietly. "You let Mom erase me, and you soaked it up." He flinched, looking down. "I know. I'm not proud of it. But that's not all." He stepped onto the porch fully, now his breath visible in the cold air. Last year, when Dad was recovering and you offered to help refinance the house, Mom told me not to let you." I blinked. "What?" "She said if you did, you'd use it to control everything. She told me to talk you out of it. I didn't think you'd actually pay the lien yourself." I stared at him, the truth sinking in slow and deep. "You thought you were protecting me," I said, "but you were protecting a lie." He nodded, shame etched across his face. "I know, and it's been eating at me." We stood there, the distance between us thin as the air. For once I saw my brother not as the favorite, but as someone who didn't know how to stop being what Mom needed him to be. He took a shaky breath. "There's something else," he said, lowering his voice. "It's about the house." My pulse quickened. "What about it?" "She's been talking to a realtor," he whispered. "She's planning to sell it before the end of the year without telling Dad." The porch light flickered. The weight of his words pressed against the cold like a second winter. "She can't," I said slowly. "She wouldn't." He looked down. "She already picked out a condo near Aunt MJ's. Says she wants to downsize, but she's leaving him Jenna. She just hasn't told him yet." The air between us tightened until it hurt to breathe. I stared at the door, then at the window, glowing with laughter that no longer sounded like home. "She was going to blindside him," I whispered. Tyler nodded once, the motion small and heavy. That was when the door opened again. Dad stepped out, jacket in hand, confusion softening the lines around his eyes. "You should both come inside," he said. "There's something I need to say." I looked at Tyler. His expression wasn't smug or sorry. It was something new, stripped bare. For the first time in years, he didn't look like Mom's golden son. He looked like my brother. And together, wordless, we followed Dad back into the house. We followed Dad back inside the cold air, closing behind us like a door on another world. The laughter that had filled the dining room earlier was gone, replaced by the sound of silverware settling and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Everyone was seated again, but no one looked comfortable. Dad walked to the head of the table, Mom's usual seat, and stood there for a long moment. His posture was steady, though his eyes carried something that made the room hold its breath. He rested his hands on the back of the chair and cleared his throat. "I've made a lot of mistakes as a father," he said quietly, his voice carrying more weight and stillness than it ever had in volume. But the biggest one was thinking silence kept the peace. No one moved, not even Tyler. I let this family believe that being loud meant being right, and that the one who never demanded attention didn't need it. He looked at me, then steady and sure. "Jenna has carried this family more than any of you will ever realize." The words barely fit in the air before they started breaking it open. Aunt MJ blinked, unsure whether to speak. My uncle looked down at his folded hands. Even the cousins stayed still, like they knew something important was happening and didn't dare interrupt. Dad went on. "She paid the IRS lien last year, quietly. She helped refinance this house. She helped me when I couldn't stand for long, when the pain kept me from doing what I used to." His voice tightened, but he kept going. "She cooked, she worked, she kept this family upright while the rest of us looked the other way." A soft gasp came from the far end of the table. Mom had come back into the room, wine glass still in her hand, her expression unreadable. "Who told you that?" she asked. "It doesn't matter who told me," Dad said, still facing the family. "What matters is that I know now." He reached into his coat and set a manila envelope on the table. The sound of it landing was louder than it should have been. "I spoke to our lawyer this morning," he said. "Starting next month, the deed to this house will be in both our names, Jenna's and mine." A stunned hush followed. Then Mom's voice sliced through it. "You're giving her the house. I'm giving her what she already saved," Dad said simply. Mom's face flushed red, the kind of red that had always come before a storm. "You can't just decide that. I own this house as much as you do." "No," he said calmly. "You don't. You signed over financial control during the refinance because you didn't want to read the paperwork. You said you trusted me." Her mouth opened, then shut again. The color drained from her cheeks as she realized what he meant. "You can't—" "I already did," he interrupted. The table was silent, every pair of eyes darting between them. Tyler sat motionless beside Brooke, who had tears gathering but didn't move to wipe them. Aunt MJ shifted again, her napkin twisting in her hands. "Well," she started softly. Maybe we should all take a moment to cool down." "No," Dad said, shaking his head. "We've been cooling down for years, pretending nothing's wrong. We're not doing that anymore." He looked around the table, his voice firm. "All of you sat here tonight and clapped while my daughter was humiliated in her own home, and I said nothing. That's on me." The clock above the fireplace ticked once, twice. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Dad turned toward me, and for a second his voice broke. When I was recovering, Jenna was the one who kept the lights on. Not because she wanted recognition, but because she couldn't stand to see us fall apart. I swallowed hard, unable to speak. My mother sat rigid at the end of the table, staring past him. And while I let her carry that weight alone, he continued, I watched her mother toast her brother for things Jenna made possible. Tyler's head dropped into his hands. The room had become unbearably small, the truth crowding every corner. Mom gave a short, bitter laugh. "This is ridiculous," she said, voice thin. Dad turned to her, slow and deliberate. "What's ridiculous," he said, "is that you were ready to sell this house, the one she saved, and move in with your sister. And you didn't think I'd find out." Her eyes snapped to Tyler, sharp and furious. "You told him Tyler didn't look up. He had to know. I was going to tell him," she said, her voice shaking. "You were going to surprise me with a listing agreement and a forwarding address," Dad said. His tone stayed even, but there was something in it that made the room colder. "You weren't downsizing Linda. You were leaving." The word hung in the air like smoke. Mom stood the chair legs scraping against the hardwood. "Do you have any idea how hard it's been managing this house while you sit in silence? I've done everything. You've done everything except listen," Dad said quietly. "To me, to Jenna, to the truth." She looked at me, then eyes bright but unyielding. "So what you win now?" I held her gaze. "This isn't about winning," I said softly. "I never wanted to win. I just wanted to stop being erased." For a long moment, nothing moved. The fireplace crackled faintly in the corner, a sound too gentle for the tension in the room. Then Mom turned, set her glass down, and walked out again. This time no one followed. Dad's eyes met mine. "I know I'm late," he said, "but I'm here now." The words sank deeper than anything else that night. I nodded, unable to speak without my voice breaking. He reached out, resting his hand over mine for a moment before pulling it back. "You deserve to feel like this home is yours," he said. "Not because your name is on the deed, but because your heart always was." Around us, people shifted in their chairs, uncertain what to do with what they'd just witnessed. No one made excuses. No one tried to smooth things over. The air held too much truth to go back to polite conversation. Slowly, one by one, relatives began to rise. Aunt MJ murmured something to Frank and gathered her purse. Paige and Nolan followed, quiet and pale. Brooke stood beside Tyler, her hand brushing his shoulder before she left the room. By the time the front door closed behind the last guest, only the three of us remained, Dad, Tyler, and me. The table looked different now, stripped of its decorations and the show it had hosted. It was just wood and dishes and a few leftover crumbs. Dad sat down at the head, finally looking tired. "I think that's enough family for one night," he said. Tyler nodded, then pushed back his chair and started clearing plates. He didn't look at me, but he didn't have to. His movements were careful, deliberate, almost penitent. No phone in hand, no attempt at charm, just quiet work. I joined him. We moved without talking, passing dishes, running water, stacking things neatly by the sink. Dad poured himself a small glass of wine, and another for me, setting it down beside my elbow. We didn't toast. We didn't need to. The house felt hollow and heavy, but also in some strange way lighter. The secrets had been spoken. The balance had shifted. When Tyler finally turned to face me, his expression was raw, stripped of everything that used to shield him. "I don't know if I can fix all of this," he said quietly, "but I want to try." I met his eyes, unsure how to answer. He gave a weak smile. "Not just because I feel guilty, because I miss having a real sister." I picked up a towel, drying the last plate. "We'll see," I said gently. He nodded. "Fair." We didn't hug. We weren't there yet. But for the first time, we weren't standing on opposite sides of a story that had always left one of us in the dark. When I finally stepped outside, The air had turned colder, the kind that wakes you up more than it chills you. The porch light cast a soft glow across the yard. I looked back through the window at the house that still looked the same, at the table where so much had come undone, and felt something settle. Not victory, not relief, just quiet. The kind that follows truth when it finally finds a place to rest. I closed the door behind me, knowing the story inside wasn't finished, but something had changed for good. The next morning, sunlight slipped through my apartment blinds, cutting across the counter where my phone buzzed beside a half-finished cup of coffee. The night before still lingered in pieces, Dad's voice, Mom's silence, the look on Tyler's face. I thought maybe the quiet would feel different now, lighter somehow, but it didn't. It just felt honest. The message came from an unknown number at first glance, but when I opened it, I recognized my cousin Paige's tone. "We were all wrong about you." "I'm sorry." That was all it said. I typed back, "Don't be sorry. Just be better," and set the phone face down on the counter. It didn't feel like closure, just the next small piece of truth finding its way home. I had taken the day off work before the holiday expecting a simple family dinner and a quick return to routine. Instead, I spent the morning cleaning the apartment in slow motions, letting the hum of the dishwasher fill the silence. I didn't know what to call the feeling in my chest, something between relief and exhaustion. Every part of me wanted stillness, but part of me also knew the story wasn't finished. By noon, the phone rang again this time with Dad's name on the screen. "Hey, kiddo," he said, his voice softer than usual. "You home?" "Yeah," I said. "Just taking it slow today." I figured, he replied. "I wanted to stop by if that's all right, just for a bit." There was hesitation there, but not the uncomfortable kind. More like a man trying to make space he hadn't made before. "Sure," I said. "Coffee's on." He arrived 20 minutes later with a small paper bag from the corner bakery, 2 apple turnovers still warm. When he stepped inside, he looked around the apartment like he hadn't realized how much time had passed since he'd last been there. The air between us was calm, not fragile, just quiet in a way that didn't need fixing. We sat at the kitchen table. "I went through the papers this morning," he said, folding his hands. "Everything's official. The house deed changed the refinance records. You don't need to worry about any of that anymore." I nodded, unsure how to respond. "I wasn't worried about the paperwork." "I know," he said gently, "but you should never have carried it alone. I should have asked more questions." He paused, letting the silence settle. "Your mother's staying with MJ for now. She called this morning. I don't know what that means yet. It wasn't news I hadn't expected, but hearing it aloud felt heavier than I thought it would. Does she plan to come back?" He shrugged slightly. "She says she needs time. I think what she really needs is perspective." We ate the turnovers in silence for a few minutes, the flake of pastry softening in the warmth of the coffee. Then Dad spoke again. "You handled yourself last night with more grace than I did in 30 years of marriage. I wanted you to know that." I looked up, startled by the words. He smiled faintly. "You've always been stronger than you think, Jenna. I just didn't see it until I had to." After he left, the apartment felt different, not lonely, but steadier. The truth had finally shifted something in him, and that was enough for now. I spent the rest of the afternoon working through small tasks that didn't need doing, letting my mind settle into the rhythm of ordinary life again. By evening, I decided to take a walk. The air was crisp, the kind that hinted at the start of winter. Streetlights flickered on as I passed the park near my building. A young couple sat on a bench, sharing a blanket laughter rising in small bursts. I realized how long it had been since I'd laughed like that without caution. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Tyler. "Can we talk?" I hesitated before replying. "Sure." "Here or the cafe near Dad's," he wrote. "He's there. Said he wants us both to come by." The drive felt shorter than it should have, maybe because my thoughts filled the distance. When I pulled up, Tyler's car was already in the driveway. The porch light was on, same as the night before, but the house seemed quieter, less like a stage, more like a place that was finally resting. Dad opened the door before I could knock. "Glad you came," he said. Inside, the smell of cinnamon and coffee filled the space. Tyler stood near the window, hands in his pockets, his posture uncertain. "I wanted to talk to both of you," Dad began, motioning toward the table, "about what happens next." We sat, and for a moment it felt almost like the calm before a storm again, but not the same kind of storm. This one felt necessary. "I'm meeting with the lawyer next week," Dad said. "We'll finalize the transfer, and then I want to put some things in writing about the house, the account's medical decisions. I should have done it years ago. Do you want help with that?" I asked. He nodded. "I'd like that. And I want you both to be there." Tyler leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Dad, I owe you both an apology," he said. His voice carried none of its usual shine. "For staying quiet when Mom turned things against Jenna, for letting her carry everything. I don't know how to make that right." Dad studied him for a moment before speaking. "Start by not letting history repeat itself." Tyler nodded slowly, his eyes lowering. "I can do that." He turned to me. "I've been thinking about everything that happened, about how easy it was to let Mom's version of the truth become ours." "You didn't deserve that." "I know," I said. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was the first step toward it. The three of us sat for a long while, letting small conversation fill the spaces where big words didn't fit. Dad asked about my work, the upcoming deadlines, the projects I'd mentioned months ago that he'd only half remembered. Tyler offered to help him clean out the garage next weekend. Ordinary things, but they felt different now, rooted, not rehearsed. When I finally stood to leave, Dad walked me to the door. "You did the hard thing last night," he said. "Sometimes that's what changes everything." Driving home, I watched the houses along the street blur into soft patches of light. For years, I'd mistaken silence for peace, believing that staying quiet was the cost of belonging. Now it was clear the silence had only protected the wrong things. That night, I sat on my couch with a blanket and an untouched cup of tea. Outside, a few snowflakes drifted under the streetlight, the kind that melted before they landed. I thought about the Thanksgiving table, about the sound of glass touching glass, and how a few simple words had pulled years of truth out from under the rug. When my phone buzzed again, it was a message from Dad. "You were right to speak up. Proud of you." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "Thanks, Dad. It means more than you know." The reply came a minute later. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day." It was simple, but it was enough. I turned off the light and let the quiet fill the room, not heavy anymore, just real. Somewhere between the hum of the city outside and the faint warmth of the radiator, I felt the beginning of something different. Peace, maybe, or the slow return of my own voice. By morning, the tension of the last 2 days had softened into a kind of calm I hadn't known before. I poured coffee, opened the blinds, and watched the pale winter sun reach across the windowsill. The world hadn't changed overnight, but I had, and that I thought might be enough to start again. The phone buzzed once more, a new message this time from Mom. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer right away. The words stayed on the screen, waiting as the sunlight grew brighter across the floor. I knew whatever came next wouldn't be simple, but for the first time I didn't feel afraid of it. Mom's text stayed on my screen all morning before I finally answered. "We can meet at the park by the library. Tomorrow at 3. Nothing more. No punctuation, no warmth, but also no fight." It was enough to say yes to. I didn't tell Dad or Tyler. Some conversations had to be faced without witnesses. The next day was gray, the kind of winter afternoon that carried the smell of cold rain before it started. I got there early and sat on a bench under a bare maple tree. A few kids played by the swings, their laughter drifting through the quiet. 10 minutes passed before I saw her walking across the grass, coat buttoned too high, hair swept up like she'd tried to look composed. When she reached the bench, she stopped instead of sitting. "You look tired," she said, like it was safer than saying hello. I could say the same, I replied. She hesitated, then sat beside me, leaving a polite space between us. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The sound of traffic from the street filled the pause. Finally, she sighed. "I don't even know where to start." "Maybe with the truth," I said quietly. Her hands clenched in her lap. I wasn't planning to sell the house to hurt anyone. I needed out. Out of what? Out of the pretending, she said, her voice shaking slightly. The smiles, the expectations. "Your father stopped seeing me years ago. I thought if I left quietly it would be easier for everyone." "You weren't leaving quietly," I said. "You were leaving in secret." She looked at me. Then her eyes tired but sharp. Do you have any idea how hard it is to be blamed for everything? For trying to keep appearances when no one helps you? I met her stare. I do, because that's exactly what I've been doing for years. The air between us tightened. She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally said, "You've always been so cold about things." Detached. Detached, I echoed. You mean quiet. You called it being difficult when I didn't want to talk about Tyler's trophies when I asked for 1 ounce of fairness. Her voice softened, just barely. You're right. I didn't make it fair. I didn't know how to. It was the closest she'd ever come to admitting anything. I wanted to believe it. You knew, Mom. You just didn't want to see it. She looked away, watching the swings sway in the wind. I thought I was protecting you, she murmured. If I kept things smooth, you'd stop feeling left out. I didn't realize it made you invisible. I didn't answer. She pulled her gloves off and rubbed her hands together, the cold reddening her skin. I didn't plan for things to go the way they did that night, she said. The toast, the fight. I was angry, embarrassed. And when your father brought up the house, I felt like the floor disappeared. It wasn't anger that night, I said evenly. It was pride. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Maybe it was both. The silence that followed wasn't cruel this time, just heavy with all the words that had been waiting too long. I could feel her searching for something to say that would undo what she'd done. But there wasn't anything left to undo, only to understand. I heard about the deed, she said finally. He really did it. He did, I said. Her shoulders slumped. That house was supposed to be our legacy. I spent half my life in it making it look like everything was fine. And I spent half my life trying to make it actually fine, I replied. She let out a brittle laugh. You sound like him. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. A long pause. Then she whispered, Do you hate me? The question caught me off guard. For years I'd thought about what I'd say if she ever asked. I could have said yes, could have listed every slight, every quiet dismissal. But when I finally spoke, my voice came out calm. No, I just don't trust you yet. She nodded, tears forming but not falling. I guess that's fair. We sat there for another 10 minutes watching the clouds slide across the sky. When she finally stood, she looked smaller than I remembered. I don't know how to fix this, she said softly. Maybe don't try to fix it, I said. Just start by not breaking it again. She gave a faint nod and walked away, her coat flapping slightly in the wind. I stayed on the bench until she disappeared around the corner. That evening, Tyler called. Dad said you met with Mom, he began. I did. How'd it go? Better than expected. Worse than I hoped. He sighed. That sounds about right. We talked a little longer about work, about the weather, about things that didn't matter, but somehow kept the conversation from ending too soon. Before hanging up, he said, Thanks for showing up that night, Jenna. You changed more than you realize. I didn't respond right away. We all needed it to change, I said finally. A few days passed before I heard from Dad again. He wanted help organizing some of the house documents for the lawyer, so I drove over on a Saturday morning. The neighborhood was quiet, the lawn still covered in a thin layer of frost. Inside the house smelled like coffee and cedar polish. Dad had already laid out folders across the dining table. I found some old letters in the safe, he said, handing me a small stack. From your grandmother. Thought you'd want them. The handwriting was delicate and looping, each word pressed with care. I skimmed a few lines, simple advice about patience, kindness, and standing your ground. It felt strange reading wisdom from someone who'd never seen how much of it I'd need. While Dad sorted through the folders, Tyler came in carrying a cardboard box. Found some stuff in the attic, he said. Mostly photos. He set the box down and I pulled out an album near the top. Most of it was from birthdays and holidays. Mom smiling beside Tyler. Dad in the background, me off to the side holding something half-wrapped. The familiar ache stirred but didn't sting like it used to. Tyler flipped through a few pages before stopping at one photo. Remember this, he asked. It was from a trip to Lake Geneva years ago. The three of us were building a sandcastle, Mom under a sun hat, Dad pretending to engineer the towers. Tyler had drawn a crooked flag at the top with my name written on it in red crayon. I forgot about that, I said. Yeah, he murmured. So did I. Dad smiled faintly. That was one of the last trips where no one was keeping score. We stayed at the table longer than we meant to, sharing small memories that had survived the years untouched. When I finally stood to leave, Dad followed me to the door. "Whatever happens with your mother," he said, "don't let her undo the peace you've built." "I won't," I promised. Driving home, the roads were wet from the morning's drizzle. Streetlights glowed against the pavement, their reflections stretching like long ribbons of gold. I thought about the way Mom had looked when she asked if I hated her about the weight behind her voice. There had been regret in it, maybe not enough, but real all the same. When I got home, I placed my grandmother's letters on the desk. The ink had faded in some places, but one line stood out clearly near the bottom of the last page. "The heart remembers what the world forgets." I read it twice, then folded the letter back into the envelope. The words stayed with me long after the light faded from the window. Something in them felt like a bridge between what had been lost and what could still be rebuilt. The next morning, an email from Dad arrived, a copy of the finalized documents, the deed transfer now officially complete. Under his signature was a single sentence: "This home stands because you did." I didn't reply right away. I just sat there letting the meaning settle. Outside, the first snow of the season had started to fall soft and slow. Each flake vanished as soon as it touched the ground, but for that brief second, every one of them caught the light. And that's where I knew part of this story wasn't about what I'd lost. It was about what finally stopped slipping through my hands. A week after the first snow life began to find its rhythm again. Work deadlines filled the mornings, and quiet evenings stretched long enough to start feeling normal. Still, part of me waited for something, an aftershock, a reminder that peace didn't usually arrive without cost. It came on a Wednesday afternoon in the form of a single voicemail. "Jenna, it's Mom. I've been talking to a realtor again. Not about the house, about my next steps. I thought you should hear it from me this time." Her voice was controlled but thin, like someone holding a piece of glass too tightly. I replayed it twice before deleting it. The sound of it didn't make me angry anymore, just tired. That night, Dad called. "Your mother stopped by," he said. "Dropped off some mail, stayed all of 10 minutes. She looked worn down." "Is she still with Aunt MJ?" I asked. "For now," he said. "But she mentioned moving into a condo by the lake." I could hear the weight behind his words. "How are you doing with all that I'll manage?" he said. "It's strange, but I'm learning that quiet doesn't have to mean lonely." The next few days passed in a blur of small adjustments, Dad learning to cook for one Tyler, stopping by after work to help with errands, the rest of the family staying polite but distant. On Saturday morning, I visited Dad to go over a few bills. He was at the kitchen table reading a letter with the envelope still torn open. "What's that?" I asked. He handed it over without a word. It was a notice from the county property reassessment paperwork that listed both our names, mine and his. Somehow, seeing it printed in black and white hit harder than the lawyer's documents had. "I guess it's real now," I said softly. "It's been real for a while," he said, "but it's nice to see it acknowledged." Tyler came by later that afternoon carrying 2 grocery bags and a sheepish smile. "I brought chili," he said. "Don't ask how it tastes yet." Dad laughed. "If it's edible, it's a success." Tyler grinned, setting the pot on the stove. "That's a low bar, but I'll take it." While they talked, I slipped into the living room. The family photos were still in the same places: vacations, birthdays, the old anniversary portrait where everyone looked a little too perfect. But there was one new frame on the mantel, a picture of Dad and me standing in front of the house last fall, the siding newly painted. I didn't remember him taking it, but seeing it there made something settle quietly in my chest. Dinner was simple but good. Tyler had learned just enough from Brooke's recipe videos to make it work. We ate, laughed, and for the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel like a battleground. It felt like a home being reclaimed. Halfway through dessert, Dad's phone rang. His smile faded when he saw the screen. "It's your mother," he said. I should answer. He stepped into the hallway. Tyler and I stayed at the table, silent at first, then filling the gap with small talk neither of us cared about. When Dad came back, his face looked tired but calm. "She wants to meet," he said. "All of us. Says it's time to talk things through." Tyler leaned back, sighing. "You think it's a good idea? I think it's overdue," Dad said. "But only if we set boundaries this time." The meeting happened 2 days later at a small cafe downtown. I arrived early, choosing a corner table where we wouldn't be overheard. Tyler came next, followed by Dad. Mom arrived last, wearing a dark wool coat and carrying herself like she'd rehearsed for the encounter. She greeted us each with a polite nod before sitting down. "I know this isn't easy," she began, her voice steady, "and I know I've made it harder than it needed to be." Dad folded his hands. "Then why are we here, Linda?" "Because I don't want to end our family like this," she said. "Not after everything that's happened." I watched her closely. She wasn't defensive this time. She looked human, almost fragile. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she continued. "Therapy, actually. That word alone caught all of us off guard. I needed to understand why I kept trying to control everything she said quietly. Why I pushed so hard for perfection that I couldn't see what I was breaking." No one spoke. Tyler finally cleared his throat. "That's good, Mom. Really good." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I can't undo what I said at Thanksgiving, or what I made you feel for years, but I want to take responsibility for it." She looked at me. "Especially with you, Jenna." The air around us stilled. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I just want you to know I see it now. All of it, the sacrifices, the things you did quietly. I see how much you gave without ever being thanked." Her voice cracked, and for a moment she didn't sound like my mother, just a woman trying to find her footing. I told myself I was being fair because I kept this family together. But what I really did was take for granted the one person who made that possible. Dad's expression softened, but he didn't speak. Tyler leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "Mom, none of us are the same people we were that night. But if you're really trying, I think we can start from there." She gave a small, trembling smile. "That's all I want." The waitress came by then, setting down fresh coffee for everyone. We sipped in silence, each of us processing in our own way. When Mom finally stood to leave, she turned to Dad. "I'll sign whatever papers you need. I don't want to fight over the house. I just want peace." He nodded. "Then let's make that our starting point." After she left, Tyler exhaled. "Well, that was something." Dad stared at the empty chair. "It's a start," he said quietly. On the drive home, I thought about her words the way she'd said, "I see it now." Maybe she really did, or maybe it would take more time. Either way, something in her tone felt genuine, like a door had finally cracked open. That weekend, I returned to the park where we'd first met after Thanksgiving. The snow had melted into patches, the air damp with early spring. I sat on the same bench, watching the branches sway above. My phone buzzed Tyler again. "Dad wants to host Sunday dinner," he said. "He's cooking this time. Think you can handle that?" I smiled. "We'll see." "Brooke's bringing dessert," he added. "Don't worry, it's edible." When Sunday came, the house felt warm again. The scent of roasted chicken filled the air, and laughter drifted in from the kitchen. Dad moved with quiet confidence, Tyler at his side, setting plates. The same dining room that once felt like a stage now looked lived in again, comfortable, real. Dinner went smoothly. There were still pauses, still moments where the ghosts of the past hovered near the edges, but they didn't stay long. Afterward, we gathered in the living room. Dad poured coffee. Tyler turned on soft music. For the first time in years, no one was performing. No one was competing for approval. As the evening wound down, Dad looked around the room and said, "This feels like the family we were supposed to be." Tyler nodded. "Yeah, just took a while to find it." I looked at both of them and felt a quiet kind of peace take root, one that didn't need permission to exist. When I stepped outside later, the night air was cool and clean. The porch light glowed against the dark, steady and soft. I thought about the journey that had brought us here, the silence, the confrontation, the shift toward something real. Behind me, the door opened, and Dad's voice called out, "Lock up when you go, kiddo." "I will," I said. As the door clicked shut, I stood for a moment listening to the sound of the wind in the trees. It wasn't forgiveness yet, not fully, but it was the start of something honest, and that I knew was enough to lead us into whatever came next. The Sunday dinner slowly became a habit again, though smaller and quieter than before. Sometimes it was just Dad, Tyler, and me. Other times Brooke joined or Aunt MJ stopped by with a pie. The table that once felt like a stage now carried an easier kind of silence, the kind that comes from people finally learning to listen. One evening in late March, we were finishing dinner when Dad set down his fork and cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he said. "It's time we made it official." He looked at me. "I want to file the updated ownership with the county. No delays this time." I nodded. "Whatever you need, I'll help." Tyler smiled. "Looks like you're really stuck with us now." We all laughed, but beneath the sound was something steadier, a shared understanding that this wasn't about property anymore. It was about acknowledgement. A week later, we met with Dad's lawyer, Mr. Halpern, at a small office downtown. The air smelled faintly of coffee and old carpet. He went over the papers carefully, page by page. "This confirms joint ownership," he explained, sliding the final form across the desk. "Both signatures make it binding." Dad signed first, then me. The pen felt heavier than it should have, as if every word written there carried years of silence and sacrifice. When we finished, Mr. Halpern smiled. "Congratulations. This home's secure now, legally and otherwise." Walking out of the office, Dad exhaled like he'd been holding that breath for a long time. "You did good, kiddo," he said quietly. We decided to celebrate with lunch at a small diner near the courthouse. Tyler met us there straight from work. He was grinning before he even sat down. "So it's done. It's done," Dad confirmed. Tyler raised his glass of iced tea. "To new beginnings." We clinked glasses, and for once there wasn't any tension in the air, just warmth. That night, back at my apartment, I found an envelope slipped under my door. My name was written in my mother's looping handwriting. Inside was a short note I heard about the papers. "I know it's what you earned. I'm trying to be happy for you, even if it hurts. I hope someday we can sit at that table together again without all the ghosts between us." There was no return address, no signature, but I didn't need one. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer with my grandmother's old notes. For the first time, Mom's words didn't reopen a wound, they acknowledged one. A few weeks later, I came by the house to help Dad paint the upstairs hallway. The scent of primer filled the air, and sunlight streamed through the half-open windows. Tyler showed up with lunch and a small box of family photos he'd been organizing. "Look what I found," he said, pulling out a faded picture of Mom and Dad on their wedding day. They were young, standing under a canopy of light, smiling like the world was still wide open. Dad studied it for a long moment. "We were so sure we had it all figured out," he said. "Funny how life proves you wrong." Tyler nodded. "You're not the only one, Dad." We kept painting through the afternoon, the sound of brushes soft against the walls. It was simple work, but it felt like something being rebuilt one quiet layer at a time. Later, when we took a break on the porch, Dad turned to me. "You know," he said, "when I first put your name on those papers, I thought I was just setting things right. But I think I was also trying to tell you something." I glanced at him. "What's that?" "That you were never invisible," he said, "even when I acted like you were." The honesty in his voice was soft but sure. I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded. That evening, Tyler lingered after Dad went inside. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the porch light flickered on automatically. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking about starting a new job. Something different." I smiled. "Leaving Crestfall." He shrugged. "Maybe. I keep realizing how much of my life I built around trying to impress Mom. I think it's time I figure out who I am without all that." "That sounds like a good idea," I said. He looked at me, then his expression steady. "You know, Jenna, none of this Dad standing up, Mom changing me, even seeing things clearly would have happened if you hadn't said something that night." I shook my head. "We all said something. Eventually." He smiled. "Yeah, but you started it." When he left, the quiet settled again, but it wasn't empty. It was the sound of a space that finally belonged to everyone who'd earned it. A few days later, Dad invited me over for coffee before work. The house looked brighter somehow, new curtains, a few fresh plants near the window. As we sat at the kitchen table, he pulled out a folder. I added something he said, to the documents. Inside was a new page, a joint living trust listing my name alongside his. "If anything happens to me," he said simply, "you'll have everything you need. No fights. No questions." I swallowed hard. "Dad," he waved it off gently, It's not about money. It's about making sure you're protected. You've spent enough years carrying everyone else. I didn't argue. Some gestures didn't need words. That weekend, I drove out to the park by the library, the same bench where Mom and I had talked months ago. The trees were beginning to bloom again, soft green buds bright against the gray sky. Sitting there, I took out my phone and typed a short message. "Mom, I got your letter." "Thank you. Maybe we can meet for coffee soon." The reply came a few hours later. "I'd like that." It wasn't a promise of repair, but it was a start. When I got home that evening, Dad called. "Tyler just told me he accepted a new position," he said. "Different firm, better hours. He said it feels like starting over." "That's good news," I said. He chuckled. "Seems like we're all starting over lately." As the week passed, the house project wrapped up and life began to look almost ordinary again. Still, every so often I caught myself thinking about that Thanksgiving table, the one where everything had fallen apart just enough to make space for truth. It struck me how quickly things can shift when someone finally decides to speak, how silence can hold a family hostage, and how honesty, no matter how late, can set it free. On Friday evening, Dad sent a photo to our group, text the freshly painted hallway, the sunlight streaming through the window, and a caption that said, "New walls. Same home. Fresh start." Tyler replied with a thumbs up. Brooke added a heart emoji. I just wrote, "Looks perfect." That night, I stood by my window looking out at the city lights below. Somewhere between the hum of traffic and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, I realized what peace really sounded like. It wasn't silence. It was steadiness. The kind that stays when the noise finally fades. The next day, Dad called again, his voice lighter than it had been in months. I was thinking, he said, maybe we should have everyone over next Sunday. A real family dinner this time. No speeches. Just food and laughter. I smiled. "I think that's a perfect idea." "Then it's settled," he said. "And Jenna, yeah, thank you for not giving up on us." After we hung up, I sat for a while in the quiet, letting the truth of his words settle. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a background character in someone else's story. Whatever came next, whatever healing still had to happen, I knew the foundation was finally strong enough to hold. The following Sunday, the house looked different before anyone even stepped inside. The porch lights glowed softly, and the air carried the scent of baked bread and rosemary. Dad had set the table himself. No crystal, no name cards, just simple plates and a few wildflowers from the backyard tucked into a vase. For the first time in years, it felt like home instead of a performance. Tyler arrived first carrying a casserole dish and the easy grin he'd been missing for years. Brooke followed with dessert, her laughter filling the hallway. I helped Dad in the kitchen, moving quietly beside him as he carved the roast. "You nervous?" I asked. "Maybe a little," he said, glancing toward the window, "but I'm more hopeful than nervous." I looked outside and saw Mom walking up the driveway. She carried nothing but a small box and a cautious smile. Dad wiped his hands on a towel and went to open the door. When she stepped in, she paused like she wasn't sure she still belonged there. "Smells good," she said softly. "It should," Dad replied, motioning her inside. "You used to make it every winter." Her eyes flicked toward me. "Jenna, thank you for agreeing to this." I nodded. We all needed it. Dinner began quietly. At first, conversation stayed close to safe topics. Tyler's new job, Brooke's travel plans, Dad's garden. Mom listened more than she spoke, but as the evening went on, her voice grew steadier, her words less guarded. When dessert was served, she reached into the box she'd brought and slid an envelope across the table toward me. "This belongs to you," she said. Inside was a stack of old family photos, birthdays, school plays, moments I hadn't seen in years. Some were faded, others still sharp. "I kept these separate because I wasn't ready to look at them," she said quietly. "But I think it's time." I ran my fingers over the edges of the pictures, recognizing one from my graduation. I'd forgotten she even took that photo. "Thank you," I said. She nodded, her voice low. "I wish I'd said thank you sooner for everything you did when I didn't know how to see it." The table fell silent. Even the sound of this heater seemed to fade. Dad reached over and rested his hand over hers. "It's never too late to mean it," he said. Mom blinked hard, her chin trembling just slightly. "I'm trying to make things right. It won't happen overnight, but I'm here if you'll let me be." Tyler broke the tension with a small smile. "I think that's a good place to start." We all shared a quiet laugh, just enough to ease the air back into the room. The rest of the night moved gently. There were no grand speeches, no apologies recited for effect, just the simple, steady rhythm of a family learning to exist in the same space again without armor. After everyone left, I stayed behind to help clean up. Dad washed dishes while I dried them, the clink of glass and running water filling the comfortable silence. When we were done, he leaned against the counter, arms folded. "You know," he said, "I never thought we'd see a night like this again." "Neither did I admitted. He smiled. "It's because you didn't walk away when you could have. You stood your ground without losing your grace. I'm proud of you." The words landed quietly but deeply, the kind that stay with you long after they're spoken. When I stepped outside, the night was still. The air was cool, the stars faint above the old oak trees lining the street. I stood on the porch looking back through the window. Inside, Dad was turning off the lights, and Mom's empty plate sat on the table beside a half-finished cup of coffee. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Driving home, the world looked softer somehow, like everything that had broken had been put back together in a different shape, one that finally made sense. For years, I'd mistaken peace for silence, love for obligation. But that night, I finally understood that real peace isn't about things staying the same. It's about finding the strength to change what should have been different all along. When I got home, I placed the envelope of photos on my kitchen counter and flipped through them again. In one, a much younger version of me was standing beside Tyler in the front yard, sunlight in our hair, both of us laughing. I set that one aside and tucked it into the frame on my desk. It felt right there, a reminder of where we'd come from and how far we'd managed to go. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with loud victories or perfect apologies. Sometimes it's as quiet as a dinner table where everyone finally listens, or a father who learns to say "I'm proud of you," or a daughter who finally stops asking to be seen. And as for me, I've learned that the hardest goodbyes aren't to people, they're to the versions of ourselves who once accepted less. Letting that go is what makes space for peace. If you've ever had to fight for your own place at the table, I hope you remember this. You deserve to be there. Not because someone gives you permission, but because you've earned it by simply being true to yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. If it spoke to you, share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to choose your own peace and to start again.